Welcome to Christian Conversations. I'm Pastor Otabil. We're continuing our discussion on marriage, and we're looking at different aspects of it. Sometimes the difficulty in marriage is not just the two parties, but other people who are also related who get part into the marriage. And we want to look at how to handle situations that go beyond just the couple, but includes management of other parties in the marriage. And we hope that we can have a discussion that will enrich you and help you to navigate your own life in a better way. I have with me Pastor Albert Okran of ICGC, the New One Temple, and we'll be talking. Pastor Albert, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Doc. So let's start with family dynamics and the fact that family is the place of the deepest love and also sometimes the deepest hate. How did the scriptures intend for the family dynamic to be?
When we look at the book of Genesis, we don't see much there in the Garden of Eden, because if there's any in-law, that would be God. He created both Adam and Eve. But we also see that as intimate as the first couple are, there is an interference, a third party, that is the serpent, who begins to speak into the marriage and begins to give counter instructions and all of that. And his involvement in the marriage disturbs not just the marriage, but the life, the quality of life of Adam and Eve. And of course, when their children come in, another complication sets in where the children are not getting on, and there's a conflict within the children that also affects them. So just from there, we realize that as much as two people can be in love, be put together by God, enjoy life just by themselves, there will be other parties that come in. It could be external to them, and it could be even their own children who become parties to the marriage and then begins to create complications. And sometimes, as you say, marriage can be the place of the deepest love, and it can also be the place of deepest hurts.
These hurts that we mention, don't they sometimes impinge, encroach on even the expression of our faith? You're in the church with somebody, you're in the same family, and you just can't deal with the issues that seem to be emanating from home. How do these issues at home impinge on the expression of our faith?
It does at all levels, especially if the people involved are in your community as well, in the church. So let's say it's a brother or a sister. So that's a brother-in-law, sister-in-law, mother-in-law, father-in-law, who are also church members. And so then you realize that the discord you are having at home then steps into the church. And so it creates a very awkward church relationship where you are told to turn to the other person next to you or shake somebody's hand, and this is not a hand you want to shake. So the complication gets into our Christian life.
Let's trace the origins of some of these frictions and conflicts, starting with siblings, maybe using the first one in the scriptures as a guide. Where do these sibling resentments, rivalries emanate from?
As Christians, we see everything contrary to good behavior as emanating from Satan, who whispers into our ears and gives us different instructions from what God has given to us. And so we may not see a serpent talking to us, but we may hear it through voices in our heads. Sometimes even through movies we watch, the serpent's voice can be heard. And sometimes through advice of supposedly well-meaning people who tell you, treat your wife this way, treat your husband this way, don't let them rule over you, don't do this, don't give this space, and all of that. And you just realize that beyond the two people, there are other voices. And if those voices are not managed well, especially if they're giving contrary instructions from what the couple have agreed to, then you may start seeing conflict emerge. And then even children can create complications for the whole family.
Talking about counsel, I guess the biggest challenge for most people is that they respect this person who is speaking to them. So they assume that once it came from this person, it is pre-validated, if I may use those words. It has to be good. And then sometimes it's contrary to scripture or best practice. How can people filter and know the right counsel to follow?
I think for us Africans, there is a complication of the problem. There's a problem which is universal. I think every culture experiences it. But for us, the problem is accelerated or complicated because we tend to be a very communalistic people. And then we tend to be very hierarchical. So whoever is your senior, whether it's your mother, your father, or uncle, older brother, older sibling, once somebody is senior to us, their words assume very strong influence over us. So that complicates it because we are hierarchical, and because we are communal, we're not able to obey the scripture sometimes, where a married couple must leave father and mother in order to cleave to each other. And most of us find it very difficult to leave. We find it difficult to leave behind our families that we came out of. That doesn't mean shun them, but also to understand that you're building a new family. And the values may not be the same as what you came out from, because this couple now have to determine a blended value system from the two places that they've come to. And sometimes we're not able to leave, and our expectations are based on the expectations of the family we came out of. This is how my mother was, this is how my father was, this is how our family is, this is how we're raised up. But you didn't marry your sibling, you married somebody else. It means that there has to be a certain distancing to say, okay, I came from a great home, I was brought up well, but we're making a new family, and we have to agree on the rules for this family. That means, as much as I value where I came from, I don't want it to become an intimidation to this new family that we are building. So there is a living there. And sometimes it's living practices, living your own habits, and sometimes friends in order to build a union. Building a marriage takes a long time. It's very difficult under any circumstance for two people to build a lasting relationship at all levels. Corporate organizations merge, and then they can't manage the new culture. You find it in nations which come together and sometimes split apart. And then sometimes you can even have a nation that says we are one people, one nation, one people, and yet we are not one people because there's too much going on between the component parts of the nation. So when we take that to marriage, we have to understand that marriage is a very difficult process. Difficult in the sense that you're merging two people. And what it takes to make that happen requires extreme sacrifice, patience, tolerance for that to happen. And it takes about 10 years, between 10 to 15 years, for a couple to properly merge their lives together.
Let's stay with the living. It seems that there is a physical living first, then there's a bit of unlearning and relearning. But some people never get past the physical living. Every weekend they're back home.
Yeah, I mean, it can still happen. You can go home every weekend. You can even live on the compound with your parents and still leave. Because the living is not just physical living, it's a mental living, it's an emotional living. So let's say a couple start their family, but for practical reasons, they can't rent a home. So they live in part of the apartment of their parents. It's not the ideal thing, but let's say that happens. They have to learn to say, although we're close to these parents, we still want to build a family of our own. That means there are times we meet together. We're still going to cook and eat our own food. And, so there are choices you are making that although you are physically close, you want to emotionally start blending with the person you are married to. The ideal thing is to be physically able to leave. But sometimes practically it becomes difficult. And temporarily, you may find people who live with their one parent or the other, or friends or the other. But it doesn't mean that just because you are in close proximity to somebody, you cannot be distant. After all, human beings, people can sit at the same table and say we are gathered to be at the same table, and everybody picks their cell phone and they've left. So physically they seem to be together, but they've left. Leaving is not just a physical thing; it's an emotional thing. It's a mental thing. It's a commitment to say, even though we are close physically to this place, we want to really consciously build a life that we can call our own and which we pass on to our children.
Doc, in creating a new culture for the new family, it would seem that each party has to do some leaving of theirs, and one cannot insist on theirs being the default culture for the new home.
Sometimes in a family, you might find the need sometimes to turn closer to one side or the other. So you may find somebody who comes from a very dysfunctional family. So let's say somebody comes from a multiple parent home. That means their father has multiple wives and they are one of the children of one of the wives. And so it's very dysfunctional. And the other person comes from a more stable home. So in terms of example, you would say that somebody's background presents a little better example to model. It doesn't mean that this one has no value, but if you're really trying to build a home where you value two parents, no third parties, and their children, then this one may offer a template that we can borrow from and adjust and make our own. So it doesn't mean that you're totally throwing away what you got from your parents, because there has to be continuity between what parents are offering and what children receive and what they pass on. There is a continuity. But in receiving, we try to receive not to impose. We try to receive to adjust to our peculiar circumstances so that we can pass on that to our children.
Let's stay with that and look at siblings, siblings and the tensions that mount between them. If you took biblical examples, there will be Cain and Abel, there will be Joseph and his brothers, there would even be Mary and Martha. How do we find the best way to create harmony among siblings that experience tensions?
It's always a big issue because we all assume that if they were brought up by the same parents, they would turn out the same way. But it's not so. Human beings are so very different and very unique. And the challenge of every parent is try to understand your children as quickly as possible. And having been a parent, and I think you haven't been, you figure your children out very early in life. Sometimes when they are months, weeks old, you just, their personality just shows through. You know the one who is aggressive, the one who is temperamental. Even the cradle, they exhibit that. So learning to know your children, keeping an eye on them, spending time with them, listening to their conversations whilst you are playing with them, you listen to how they talk, you listen to how they relate to even the toys they have. Pretty soon you understand them. You know who is more secure, who is less secure, who seeks more attention, who wants to be alone. You learn that. So pretty soon you get to know your children and each one in their uniqueness. Now, you don't get to know this to prefer one over the other. You get to know this so you can manage the tensions a little better. Who is going to upset whom? Who's going to make whom cry? Who is going to be the one beating the other one? I mean, these are things you get to know, so you manage the tensions a little better. Unfortunately, sometimes, as we see in some of the biblical stories like Jacob and Esau, and Isaac and Rebekah. I mean, the parents have chosen favorites. Isaac likes Esau, and Rebecca likes Jacob. I mean, for whatever reason,
Very clearly.
very clearly. I mean, they have favorites, and they're playing games with their favorites to outsmart the other one, and it creates serious complications for them in their life and even in the life of their descendants. So, but just looking at the biblical story, right from birth, you see the personalities showing. And the Bible says that Esau comes out first. He's the first of the twin, but Jacob is holding his heel. So it just tells you these guys are a very competitive bunch. They are not twins who are complementary. They are twins who are competitive and quite contradictory, although they are supposed to be twins. They may wear the same attire, but they are very contradictory to each other. And the parents must be able to discern that and see how to manage. You don't accentuate, you don't deepen the insecurities of your children. And definitely you don't compare them one to the other. I mean, that's the no-no of parenting 101. Don't compare any child with the other one.
Very, very, very critical. Let's go to in-laws. Just the mention of it evokes certain responses, even without saying anything. Why is this so?
Well, they are laws, isn't it? And we all feel law and lawyers. So any relation that is related to law tends to give us the impression that there will be litigation.
Wonder where the name came from.
I don't know. I don't know where it came from. And sometimes it works out very well. I mean, some in-laws are having a blessing for children and for marriages because they are well-adjusted in-laws who understand their role and who give space to their children, who embrace both children, and they are very good in-laws. Unfortunately, there are people who are not well adjusted, and they weren't that way because they are in-laws. They were that way before they became in-laws. In other words, they don't know how to handle themselves well. They don't know how to handle different people well. They don't know how to be fair and treat people with respect and honor. They don't know how to create boundaries, and so part of the problem of in-laws is boundaries.
Okay.
Where do we draw the boundary? Where does Ghana end? Where does Togo begin? You know, where does your space end? Where does ours begin? How do you manage it so you don't step out of bounds, either in comments you are making, in offers you are making, in time and how you spend time? And people who don't know how to manage boundaries can never be good in-laws. They can't even be good team players because they don't know boundaries. They're always intruding. They're saying the wrong thing. They don't know how to show how to be fair. They always have to prefer one over the other because their lives have not been very harmonious. And unfortunately, if they become in-laws, then we are in for a serious litigation in the family.
Wow. We'll come to the implications or the effects, but you use the word well-adjusted. I like it. How do you know, or what does it take to be well-adjusted?
A well-adjusted person is a person who knows themselves and is at peace with themselves. They don't depend on somebody else to be themselves. They've learned to live with themselves. Make peace with themselves. Even if they don't have enough, they've learned to adapt to their situation and don't let their need become a burden on somebody. So they are well adjusted. If they are extremely successful, they've learned to humbly and soberly accept their privileged status and don't impose it to make other people feel small. So a well-adjusted person has this ability to hold both their strength, their weakness, their failings, whatever life dumped on them, they don't make it a burden on other persons. They've learned to live with themselves. As I said, it's very difficult for us, most Africans, to live with themselves because we are very communal people. We seek approval from the society, from the group. That is why up to now, a lot of people still find their sense of being from the schools they attended. Old Students Association, they belong to that association. They belong to that group. They wear the same fabric. So being in the group is where we find our equilibrium, our base. And there is value in being in a group, but eventually we are individuals and we have to be at peace with ourselves in spite of our challenges and our limitations and our achievements. We have to learn to be at peace. And people who learn to do that generally are able to embrace other people into their lives.
Will the opposite then be an attempt to actually live out your life in the life of the couple that is starting the journey?
Well, parents try to live their lives through their children. We all try to, things you couldn't do, you wish your children would do. And whilst that can be a positive thing, because maybe it's a good thing you couldn't do and you wish that they do. You didn't go to school to a certain level. You want your children to get there. You didn't manage a certain aspect of your life well. You want your children to solve that, Maybe you work for all your life and you went on retirement, you didn't have a house, and you say to your children, hey, listen, you have to buy land, you have to build a house, you have to do this, you have to save, because you don't want them to repeat your mistakes. So that is great. But sometimes it gets overbearing, where it's no longer a suggestion, it's no longer a guide, it is a compelling drive where you get offended if your suggestion is not taking. And whether it's to your child or the person your child married, you want them to cook a certain way, and if they don't cook a certain way, you get offended. You want them to behave a certain way, they don't do, you get offended. Then, you have to chill at a point and realize, it's their lives. And much as your view may be better because of experience, sometimes you need to give people space to grow, to learn lessons.
Let's come into the space of the couple where one agrees with a position taken by a parent or an in-law and the other person does not agree. And that difference is becoming stronger and stronger and increasing in tension. What dynamic does it create?
At a certain point, I feel that a couple must prioritize their relationship over every other relationship. We forsake all, we leave all, and we cleave. And we don't mean that in a severe sense that you cut everybody out of your life, but at a certain point where there's conflict, and you know that really what is causing this conflict is because you hold a position that didn't originate from the two of you, it originated from outside your marriage, either from a parent or a friend or somebody. When you realize that this is what is happening, I think at a certain point, we have to let go and try to negotiate a new path. And sometimes it's good, even if the idea has come from outside, not to reference it. The worst thing you want to do, for example, if you're a lady, to say, my father says, or if you're a man, my mother says this. That's why even my mother said that. You can express the sentiment without giving it that polarized conversation. And so you can say, oh, I think we should save. But if you say, my father says we should save, or my mother says we should save, men who don't save are like that, then you're putting your spouse in a defensive way. And, it's always good sometimes to own an idea instead of being a channel of an idea. That even if you got the idea from somewhere, at a point it has to be something you are convinced of, that you think must happen, and you must debate it. And of course, all of us came from families. A lot of what I do in my life, I inherited from the home I came out of. I can throw that away, but I cannot also throw my family out every time. I can say, this is how I behave, without saying, this is how my father brought me up, this is how my mother brought me up. In our family, we don't do this. When you do that, then what is supposed to be positive is becoming polarizing.
How do you deal with respectfully negotiating your way away from what has been thrown at you or suggested to you without dishonoring or disrespecting the authority figure that is trying to encroach.
It's always difficult. I mean, there's no easy way out, especially if the authority figure doesn't let go, and keeps hammering and hammering and hammering, and is not letting go. It's difficult. Then, your conflict between disrespect, dishonor, and just surrendering. And you don't want to surrender, and you don't want to dishonor too. So it can create conflict. And I think those of us who are authority figures must bear that in mind, that there is a time when we take our legs off the accelerator and say, listen, I think I've spoken enough. I'm going to pray about this, and I'm going to hope that they pick up on it and act on it. And if they don't, I'm not going to bring it up. At least I'll give it another 2 years before I bring it up. So just give them space to try and negotiate that transition that you're talking about.
When issues come up in the family and lead to conflict, sometimes it would seem that the pain and the hurt lasts longer than how it does in the workplace setting or other settings. That seems to be natural, but how do we find a way out?
I think it happens very frequently in a young marriage. Silent wars become almost the thing. Cold War. We're not fighting, but we're not talking to, and everybody is just quiet, hoping that the other person would say sorry, because we all want to save face. Everybody wants to save face. I would say that as the marriage grows, there's less of that, because over time you just realize we're going to make up anyway. We're going to make up in a week's time. So why should I suffer for 1 week? Let's make up right now. So you make up very quickly, and then over time you learn how to diffuse tension. As a person, your spouse so well, that if this is happening and I do this, tensions will come down. So over time, you know how to diffuse tensions quickly. When you are young in marriage, you don't know how to diffuse tension. You don't want to lose face. And you want to win the argument and the debate, win for whom I don't know. But over time, you let go. But what I would suggest to young couples is that they set the rules of engagement to their marriage quickly. In other words, they can say, listen, every Sunday evening, we're going to sit as a couple, the two of us, and whatever has happened this week, we're going to try and resolve it. And we will not stop until we resolved it. So even if we are angry, we'll talk through the anger, but we'll have to make peace every Sunday evening, so that at least the new week doesn't come to meet you in trouble. So you have to set up systems for conflict resolution, how you do it. And each one must play a role. It's not one person seeking for peace and the other person holding on all the time. It's just a good lesson to learn that nobody wins the argument in any marriage. Nobody wins.
Let's take the point about nobody wins. Must couples intentionally develop an appetite for peace?
I think so. But developing the appetite for peace and eating peace is another thing. Because, I think generally most people want peace in their marriage. Most people want a good marriage. They want to come home, their husband is happy, wife is happy, they sit around, they chat a little, just bond. Because the day has been difficult, you want to come home, even if it's for 30 minutes, 1 hour, just a good time between the two of you. I think all couples want that. But it's not easy to achieve because we carry along our frustrations, our pain, our dejection, rejection, our anger, all of it to the end of the day. And it's easy to hold it against the other person and not resolve it. So there has to be an intentionality, and it may not be daily, but I think weekly, a couple should develop a discipline of resolving outstanding issues.
Are there relationships, family relationships, that are impossible to fix?
If the person is impossible to deal with, and when I say impossible to deal with, that they throughout their life have been very antagonistic, they haven't learned to be at peace with themselves, then you may learn to deal with them from a distance. And hopefully the two couple, if you know your mother or your father is a trouble, you shouldn't let your wife or your husband be the one to discover that, because you should know your parents, that as much as you love them, they are troublesome and quarrelsome. I mean, you should know that. You've lived with them, so you don't wait for your spouse to discover that. If my mother is quarrelsome, I should know my mother is quarrelsome. I don't need anybody to help me to know that. You've lived with her. So it's important that we also protect our spouses from our troublesome, dysfunctional families, so that they don't transfer their dysfunction into the new family we are beginning.
How do you achieve that?
Well, I feel everybody should know themselves, and they should know the world they have come out of. If you came from a home where there's so much abuse, your father is beating your mother, I mean, nobody should tell you that you come from a dysfunctional home. Children are always fighting and they pull knife on each other. I mean, you don't need psychologists to tell you that. You know that your family, even if you escaped and you have done well, and you still know that the factory that produced you was a bad factory. And although you escaped, you haven't fully escaped. Now you've joined to somebody, granting he is also from such a family. The two of you must resolve. There's going to be a curtain between where we came from and where we are. And this new place, we're going to build it differently. And these are the rules by which we would do it differently. And sometimes the best way to do it is to adopt a new family. Adopt a new family. Not your father, not your mother, but a family that is wholesome. And decide that, you know what, we're going to try to pattern our lives after this family. We'll take our advice from these two couples. This is going to be our reference point. This is where we navigate our difficulties, and this is how we make our decisions. And if it's beyond us, we're going to talk to Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, and just get their opinion and weigh it against our own position and see whether we are on track. So sometimes the best way to isolate from the toxic environments we come from is to adopt a wholesome example.
Some families have different cultures, different religious persuasions, and different types of behavior all in one bucket. Sometimes you just have a mix of different.
Yeah, the toxicity can be very deep.
Yes.
Multi-layered.
How do you navigate that one?
I feel once, and that's why I feel that you marry people you share a commonality of faith with. Commonality of faith. You believe the same thing. You may not even be in the same church, but you must believe in the same thing, because belief is so critical to thinking. We solve problems based on what we believe and how we believe it. So if you have a common belief, you have a common reference point, the two of you can read the Bible, come to an assessment. This is what Jesus says. As hard as it is, we're committing to following Jesus. He says, let not the sun go down on your anger. He says, forgive. He says, and it's hard, but we're Jesus followers, and we're going to try and do things the Jesus way. So then what you have done is you've created a new model for your lives. You're going to endeavor to build. Abraham came from a totally idolatrous home, from the Ur of the Chaldees. But God showed him, I'm going to teach you about the one true God, and I'm going to teach your descendants about them. So Abraham then has to build a totally new culture, divorced from the culture he came out of. And sometimes in marriage, some people may find that they can't repeat their past. They can't repeat their families. They have to be like Abraham. They have to be like Sarah and start a whole new lineage and a whole new family. And that is a critical choice people must make.
Doc, as we wrap up today, at least if families haven't learned anything, the Sunday evening reconciliation is a good beginning, a practical tool they can work with. Let's sign off by sharing a thought with families or couples, no matter what level they are at, that will help them to move forward and be more like what God meant for families to be.
Well, I believe self-awareness is probably one of the most important tools for personal transformation. The Christian life starts with self-awareness, and the Bible calls it repentance. Being aware of your state and committing to change is what starts the process. So, if for nothing, you have to know yourself. Know the family you came out of. If it's dysfunctional, don't try to defend dysfunctionality. If your father was cruel, don't defend him. If your mother was cruel, don't defend her. Accept the dysfunction and repent, determine I'm going to be different. And with your couple, chart a new path, write a new charter, and start working your way out of that. Because if you don't, you will constantly repeat the mistakes of your parents and the families you came out of. And their dysfunctions will become your dysfunction, and that of your children, and that of your children's children. So this is something every one of us must take very serious. Take a personal inventory of yourself, your family, where you came from, your spouse, and where they came from. And then let's decide we're building something different because we want to pass on something different to our children. And I trust that each one of us can build a noble marriage, a noble family, wholesome life, and a Christ-centered life. Let's keep talking, and we'll see you again.